Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. In this episode, we're going to talk about the essential educational resources that you should have at your fingertips if you're a mineral and royalty owner. And this can range from if you're just getting started and are just trying to figure this all out and where to go to learn, the basics, or if you're a more advanced royalty owner and you want to further your education, some of the tools and resources that we found helpful in our journey. So, Justin, before we hit record, I know we were talking about this being kind of a part of a overall series on tools and resources for mineral owners. And we have another episode that'll be published after this one where we talk about some of our favorite tools. And so we'll get into that from that standpoint. But we're going to really be setting the foundation here, from a learning standpoint and why that's so important with minerals and royalties.
Yep, you said it, Matt, and it's a evolution. You can't take it all in at once, so you kind of reassess resources and learn more as you go along. And there's a lot of resources in this list, and some of them are really valuable and can help you to learn the fundamentals, and then some kind of expand that and talk about the industry as a whole and some of the more technical aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly, whether you've inherited minerals just recently, or again, if you've been managing them for years, understanding the oil and gas industry sometimes can feel like learning a foreign language. There's so many different terms and acronyms. And even, I've worked in the industry for, at this point, like 26 years, and there's always new acronyms that I come across. And for whatever reason, I think it's maybe because the industry is primarily comprised of technical people, and being a technical person and kind of a nerd myself, we come up with these new cute terms for this new technique that we develop or this new resource or tool. And the industry seems to be one of the worst. Probably the medical and kind of that side of things is probably another one that has a lot of acronyms and terms. But from leasing, the basics of that, the complexities of drilling, completions, production, there's a steep learning curve for most people. You're kind of thrown into this not knowing anything about the industry, and all of a sudden you need to learn the basics to be able to effectively manage these interests that you own that are very closely tied to the intricacies of that industry. So again, that's why we're going to talk in this episode about those essential educational resources that can help you better understand your mineral rights and also the oil and gas industry as a whole. And so we'll share those along the way, what we found to be helpful. And then, again, this is kind of an evergreen list. And as always, if you find something that you came across that's helpful, shoot us an email. We'll add it to our list. You can send an email to feedback@mineralrightspodcast.com. There's also a section on the website. If you go to mineralrightspodcast.com and at the top, click on resources, we'll have a list of some of these resources out there so you can find them. And of course, what we talk about today in this particular episode, we'll have everything, all the websites, all the books, everything linked in the show notes. So you can go and find those after you listen. So what do you think, Justin? Should we dive into the first set of resources as far as organizations and communities that are out there?
Yep, absolutely, Matt. And this is certainly one of the most valuable. We constantly talk about how it's a evolving process. And one of the best ways to handle that is to have a network of people around you that you can use as a resource. There's lots of different organizations in the oil and gas industry that support different parts of the industry. One of the challenging parts, kind of like attorneys, is sometimes finding the ones that represent mineral owners specifically rather than oil and gas companies or drilling companies, whatever it might be. Matt, you and I both are part of the NARO organization, the National Association of Royalty Owners, and we put on in-person events where you can meet people in your state that also have minerals and likely have been through some of the scenarios that you might encounter or maybe that you're going through right now. And I think one of the most valuable things is meeting those folks and having those connections and being able to learn. The presentations that are put on are primarily focused on the leading edge of oil and gas. So maybe what is changing in the industry. Maybe it's having divisional board analysts talk about what real life looks like for them currently. But there's lots of folks who have been through just about everything from leasing to selling their minerals to inheriting minerals. So it's a great resource. And they're not alone, Matt. There's other state organizations as well. Do you want to talk about some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And, within the National Association of Royalty Owners, if you want to go deep, they're there to support you as deep in that education journey as you want to go. And they even have a certification program. So it's this mineral management program, it's called. And you can become a certified mineral manager or you can become a registered mineral manager. And basically, even if you don't do that, I would highly encourage you to check out the mineral management program. There is a manual that goes along with that that's a study guide for the certification program, but it's also an amazing resource just to have as a mineral and royalty owner, just to go back and, okay, how do I calculate my decimal interest in that well again? And, or what are the different types of clauses that I should think about when leasing? It has a lot of great resources and great tips in there. And it's a very reasonably priced. I think it's like $100, and you get a physical book that you can refer to. And, like Justin said earlier, there is so much to learn that, it's almost impossible to do that and just sit down and, go through everything and become an expert in everything. So what we always encourage is, as you're going through a particular challenge or whatever issue that you're facing, that's when you go deep on and learn about that particular thing, whether it's you've been approached to sign an oil and gas lease and you need to learn and do the crash course on the different clauses for leasing, or, what are the different terms I should negotiate for and what are the things I should talk to my attorney about when they're helping me negotiate that lease. So those types of things. And what I would see this episode in particular is kind of a resource for that. So you know where to go to find that information when you're in that moment of needing to know that particular aspect of owning minerals and royalties, and understanding that this is a lifelong journey. You don't need to learn this all overnight or anything like that. But to your point, Justin, there are lots of other resources out there, at the state level. So NARO is a national organization. We have state chapters as well that dive in and look at state advocacy issues and state issues and have state events and webinars and things like that. But there are also things in different states, like in Texas, for example, there's TIPRO, which is the Texas Independent Producers and Royalty Owners Association. And it represents individuals and companies from the Texas oil and gas industry. It does have a heavy focus on the independent oil and gas producers, so the small mom and pop operators, but they do also represent royalty owners. The only time I would say that I've seen where there's a conflict is if there's a particular issue that the producers are on one side of the fence and the royalty owners on the other side of the fence. I think they're sometimes lean a little bit towards the industry side. That's my, just impression, but they do also kind of in general have that kind of unified front of the industry plus the royalty owners, that it is not just big oil out there. It's a mix of different folks that are both on the operator side as well as the royalty owners side that are affected by these regulatory issues, oftentimes at the state level or at the national level. So that is a great resource if you're a Texas mineral and royalty owner. Another fantastic resource, and I don't know, Justin, are there any other state-specific resources that come to mind?
I was just going to highlight, we've done some talking about this in our news episodes, but a good example of what the organizations like this can do is SAMHSA in Arkansas. And they're involved with the current lithium negotiations with royalties, and they're really the counter-opposing side representing mineral right owners. And that's a great kind of example that probably doesn't happen too often, but these companies are heavily involved and can really influence what these royalties are going to be for the lithium situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. So just, look for your particular state. You can always just search the state name and then Royalty Owner Association and see what's out there. There are a lot of state specific groups, they're disconnected. They're sort of, on their own, but then, from a national perspective, there's the National Association of Royalty Owners that has state chapters in all those states and representation in all states as well. So it's kind of a combination of both. I would say you get into those local state organizations, they may are doing their main focus is on the advocacy side and legislation and things like that. And then the way I look at NARO is like it's a great resource for wherever you are across the country to get educated and to network as well. So speaking of networking, Justin, another online resource is the Mineral Rights Forum. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the Mineral Rights Forum has been around for quite a while and is a great resource for getting information from folks who may be in the area of your minerals or might be in touch with it. There's a lot of industry folks on there. The National Association of Royalty Owner has some folks who answer questions. There's attorneys. It's really a wonderful place to kind of get general questions answered. It is the general public, so you should take the information and verify it with your own resources. But Matt, at the height of leasing in the Permian Basin, it was really one of the better places that you could find out what leasing bonuses were going for. And of course, it wasn't religious truth, but there really wasn't another place to find that out. And folks were really taking advantage of it to ensure they could negotiate and had a fair negotiation with oil companies at that time.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's very hit or miss, I guess, depending on exactly where your minerals or royalties are. It could be that you're right next door where someone posted on there that they had a lease offer, or, it's a great, I'd say in the case where you get a lease offer, or you get multiple lease offers, you say, hey, here's what I'm being offered. Is this the going rate in the area? And it's very important to list your legal description of your property when you make a post on there, because it is very dependent on the specifics of your mineral tract as to what the going rate might be. It could be that in the county, they're getting $10,000 per net acre and a lease bonus and 25% royalty. And that's in the heart of that play. But then you're on the fringe away from where there's no oil and gas activity, then it's going to be a very different set of numbers that you're dealing with. But yeah, just, all that in mind, it's a great resource. Use it like Justin said, trust but verify sort of a thing. People may have their own motivations when they reply to your message, and so you got to take that into account when you before you act on it. But it can be a great resource and a good place to meet other mineral and royalty owners that have interest in your county as well.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. Yep, and a great place for strange questions. If you just have an off-the-wall question and need direction, hopefully somebody there can point you. Matt, the Energy Information Administration is one of the official sources of information. How do you use that as a mineral owner? What situation comes up that you go check the EIA?
Yeah, this is a great point. So we'll kind of transition now to sort of these other websites that are out there, other online resources for learning about oil and gas in general. And with the EIA, this is a great one to bookmark. And the two pages that I refer to quite often are the historical spot price data or charts for oil and for natural gas. And so you can just Google Henry Hub spot price EIA, and it'll link you to that page that has, you can slice and dice it by, weekly numbers, by monthly, so you can see what the average price for the month was. And so these are the numbers that we refer to. And in fact, we have a couple of episodes where we talked about auditing or reviewing your revenue statements. This is the data I use to check the historical oil and gas prices against what was paid, so that you can figure out the differential, the basis differential. So that's the price that was paid at the wellhead in your area versus what the market price was. And so that's something you can use to say, okay, here's what that kind of average is over time. Is that trending up or down? That's a useful piece of information. Or if you don't have any other, information about what the spot price is in your particular basin, you can use the combination of your kind of average basis differential versus the Henry Hub spot price or the West Texas Intermediate spot price to figure out what ballpark number, what you think you should have been paid for that month versus what you were paid, to see if there's a big discrepancy there, if the price looks really low, let's say on your royalty check. So yeah, that's a good resource. And then the other one to find, like I was kind of alluding to, is the West Texas Intermediate spot price data from EIA. And again, just Google that and it'll take you to those pages. You can bookmark them. You can download it into an Excel spreadsheet to manipulate, to review and see what those prices were like on a given month in the past. The other thing that's useful is they have a short-term energy outlook. And so you can just search for EIA STEO, and that'll pull up the latest short-term energy outlook. And there they talk about where they see oil and gas prices going for the next year or so. And they'll talk about the different, macroeconomic issues or whatever that are affecting oil and gas prices. And so that's a good resource to kind of get an insight into what the future of oil and gas prices, might do. But there's a lot of useful information out there as far as production, what the total production is across the United States and those trends, both oil and gas. You can kind of see from a supply standpoint, what the trends are. That's sort of useful to know as well. But yeah, it's a good resource out there.
Yeah, lots of information and lots of studies that you can dive into if you're trying to learn something specific or what has been done over the different projects that they're involved in. A couple different aspects, Matt, that get more technical in the industry is the legal aspect or doing title work. And there is an association called the American Association of Professional Landmen. And if you are going and hiring a landman, it's very likely that they are a member of this organization. And this is something that you get a certification, you get an education, just like a trade program, and that allows you to go do title work. And Matt, these are career professionals. Many times they do this for most of their career, and they're very knowledgeable people just from being around the industry. The other aspect is the technical aspect, and this is an area where folks who are really science-minded find geology interesting, find the technology of how drilling an oil well and what's evolving. You can get just as technical as you want, and I would say those are the two areas where mineral owners can really either choose to work with an outside partner or get involved in it. And many times you kind of do learn it over the years. Yeah,
you tend to learn it as you're researching your properties. You're basically doing the work of a landman. You're running title, understanding mineral title in particular. But they also have some great resources. It's their website is landman.org. That's a great resource. And then if you find an independent landman that you're looking at working with and you want to see if they're an AAPL member, because the benefit of working with an AAPL member is they agree to abide by the AAPL's code of ethics and standards of practice. So that somebody that you're working with has agreed to deal, ethically with the general public and with mineral and royalty owners and their services. So that's a great kind of extra check, before you hire somebody to do some work for you. And you can look at as the general public, you can look up somebody specifically. You can see if they're a AAPL member. I think you have to be a member to do a more broad search of landmen that are in your state or in the area where your minerals are located, but you can search by name just from a general public standpoint. And you can become a member as a non-oil and gas professional or non-landman. They have different levels. One is an associate member, and that doesn't require that you have an active AAPL member to sponsor you. So that's something you could become a member, and then you could get access to some of the training that's out there and learning. So if you want to go a little bit deeper on learning about how to run title and things like that, there's all kinds of resources out there with the AAPL where you can learn more. So great resource as well. Now, Justin, let's talk about some of the more technical aspects of the drilling and production and, the terms that you come across, and you need the decoder ring to figure out what a bumper spring is in a well or something like that. And you say, okay, I have no idea what this term is that they are talking about on this this permit or this sundry that I found. I want to learn what they're really doing. That is where the Society of Petroleum Engineers website comes into play. And in particular, they have the PetroWiki, which is, there's sort of three components to this site. And we'll link to this in the show notes. And this is an amazing resource. They have, the first part is basically the PetroWiki content, which is just free articles on basic oil and gas industry concepts. And just as an example, and like looking at this PetroWiki content, let's say you have interest in, parts of West Texas, they're looking at doing a CO2 flood. And you're like, okay, well, what is that exactly? What does that mean? What are the things to think about? And there's a free article on here about miscible CO2 flooding. And so you can learn about how it works, the benefits, the site selection, what makes a particular reservoir suitable for CO2 flood and things like that. So it's a really, on these very specific, somewhat technical topics that you can learn about in small bite-sized pieces. There's tons of free articles cyclic steam stimulation, for example. In California, this is a big way because of the heavy oil that's there. You want to learn about cyclic steam. There's a thing about how that works, the examples of how they do it, and the types of reservoirs again. So it's a really great resource. So that's just even one part of this whole One Petro or Petro Wiki that the SPE offers. The next one is this E&P glossary. So, I mentioned that term bumper spring, and I'll just look it up and read you the definition on the on this glossary. And this is it's alphabetical. So, whatever the term is, the first letter of that term, you can look it up and it will tell you the definition and tell you more. In fact, they don't have a bumper spring listing, but it is part of when you have a gas well that is on artificial lift, you do plunger lift, and it's the spring that sort of the plunger will come up and hit as it cycles through, and it sort of prevents it from slamming into the top of the wellhead. But yeah, so things like that, anything you want to know, any sort of term, acronym, BTU, if you see that on your gas statement, it's a British thermal unit. It has that in there. But just very useful in terms of that decoder ring for all of the oil and gas terminology. And then the last part of that Petro Wiki is the Petroleum Engineering Handbook, and they have different volumes that cover each aspect of the petroleum engineering, from reservoir engineering side, facilities and construction, production operations, general engineering, drilling, and these are paid. Those are $115 a piece, I think, for each of those books. But if you wanted to go really deep on, drilling engineering, for example, and how do they do that, and I just want to nerd out on drilling engineering, you could buy that volume, and it's available online to view. So yeah, very, very great resource. Highly recommend it. Certainly the free content is amazing for everybody. And then if you really wanted to go deeper, if you're interested in, pursuing and kind of going from a career path standpoint, understanding what a petroleum engineer does, you can learn about that as well.
Yeah, Matt, and it's a very interesting thing. And, you might also hear this from the operator if you call them and say, hey, why am I not being paid royalties? And they say, oh, well, we're doing a workover on the well, or this went wrong. And it may make your head spin. And so it's a great place to go to kind of find out what it is they're talking about and get confirmation. All right, Matt. So another area where there's a lot of content out there is books and publications. So especially on the publication front, there's a ton of news. It's always coming, especially since Trump has taken office this year. It has been nonstop for one reason or another. There's also lots of folks out there, from attorneys to people like us that do the podcast, that put out good content, trying to educate royalty owners, or even just talk about the industry in general. Matt, you have some favorite books, and I've read Never Split the Difference, which I thought was a great book, and talked about negotiating and how to, properly navigate that in the conversation and be in control of that. And that's really important when you're a mineral right owner, because if you get a chance to lease, it's not a 4-year, 5-year, 6-year thing. This may be an 80-year commitment that you're making. And so you really want to take your time and be in control of that. And there's some other really good books as well that talk about the industry as a whole, maybe the history of how the industry came to be, the changes in the technology. So let's dive in, Matt.
Let's dive in. So yeah, just starting at the top, let's talk about the history, since you mentioned that. So the prize is a Pulitzer Prize winning book by Daniel Yergin, where it starts from the beginning of time, basically when we first discovered oil, and then the history, very specifically across the world, as for when they went to these different areas and drilled the first well, like the Drake well in Pennsylvania has a bunch of information about that. Talks about Spindletop in East Texas and that whole boom that happened. And it talks about globally, other areas that have had a lot of oil and gas booms and drilling occur. And so it's a great kind of, if you're a history buff and you really want to learn more about the history of the industry, this is kind of the benchmark book on that subject. And it really is a great reference. It's very interesting. Now, I will say there are bits and pieces that are a bit dry. It's very detailed. It's very much a history book. And so if you're into that and like that kind of information, this is a great one to have on the bookshelf. But it's, really interesting to learn about the history of these different companies, how they were split up, the antitrust things, and different, companies you come across and maybe that are operators today and how they kind of tie back to those original companies that were formed back at the beginning. But yeah, a really good history book. The other one from a standpoint of like the general industry knowledge and like one of the things that I know that I get a lot of questions, and particularly I would say over the past several years, where people are struggling with the moral implications of benefiting from oil and gas production, receiving royalty checks from the sale of oil and gas. When you hear in the news that we have, global warming, we have, wanting to transition to lower carbon emissions, and like, how does this, how can I feel good about fossil fuel production and benefiting from that? And I think a great book to understand the facts, because I think a lot of what the oil and gas industry, the realities and the implications on the climate and things like that are misleading in the mainstream media. And so I think it's important to have the facts and form your own opinion, both listening to some of that mainstream stuff and then also doing some of the independent journalism and learning about pros and cons of the different types of energy systems and things like that. So the moral case for fossil fuels, and we had Alex Epstein, who is the author of that book, on the show, and we'll link to that episode in the show notes. But that is a really good read, and it talks about how actually human flourishing is going to require that humanity use more fossil fuels, not less, which is contrary to a lot of what you'll hear in the mainstream media. Then he has another book called Fossil Future as well, which is a great read. And it talks about, going forward, what does this mean for us in the future? And so, we'll link to both those books in the show notes as well.
Yeah, Matt. And Alex has put out a couple other books as well that are really interesting and talk more about the current times. And there's lots of other books out there as well. If you go searching on Google Books, for instance, there's a ton of books that have been published over the years about people's experiences in the industry and technology and all kinds of things. All right, Matt. So one of the most asked for things, I would say, are courses and workshops. And these can be either a take at a comprehensive course or workshop like the CMM or RMM program, or these can be very targeted. Maybe it's a course or a workshop just about leasing specifically. Having access to those is really valuable because you can get that timely information and access to the speaker or to ask questions if you have a unique situation. And these are both offered by organizations like NARO, and there are official programs like the Colorado School of Mines, which you're a graduate of, Matt, and Texas A&M. And others as well. And the NARO organization works with some of these universities, or we would like to, and are working on expanding that so that we can bring more people into the community. And that will help everybody. Not only can they get the experience of the mineral owner, but the mineral owners have, access to some folks who are really highly educated. And Matt, one of the things that I've always thought that's interesting, not being an industry person, just a mineral owner, is that there are so many people like yourself who start in the industry, and throughout your career, you go, "Hey, that's a viable way to make passive income, and something I'm really interested in being a mineral owner." And then there's some folks who never get into that and stay in the industry their entire lives.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a very dynamic industry, very broad in nature, and so people can be in very specific areas that they work. But to your point, I think those universities, and I would say community colleges in particular, and especially in areas where there is oil and gas production, and if you live locally there where they're drilling and things like that, there's a lot of courses that are available for people that are looking to enter into that industry. And so you can take some of those courses about the basics of those working in the industry, or basics of oil and gas production. And if that's not available in person where you're at, there are some books as well, kind of back to the books and publications. There's 2 books that are really good. Like we mentioned, that Petro Wiki, which is a great resource, but it doesn't really walk you step by step through the life cycle of oil and gas, from the geology and where oil and gas is found and how it's trapped and where they go to drill and the types of drilling. So you could potentially, I guess, do that, piece those things together if you know where to look in that Petro Wiki. But there's 2 books that are really good. And when I first, when I was working for Shell, I started working in the downstream side, so the pipelines and, that side of things. And so when I moved up to the upstream, I had to learn about some of the basics, and they had a course, I think it was like Upstream 101 or something like that. And so I took a multi-day course there that they offered, where they had some of the experts, they had geologists and production engineers that talked about, very high level, for people that were coming in and working, in this side of the business for the first time and wanted to learn the overview. The best thing that I found, there's 2 books. There's one, Non-Technical Guide to Petroleum Geology, Exploration, Drilling, and Production by Norman Hine. You can find that, I'm sure, wherever books are sold. We'll link to that on Amazon. And it's a great introductory book for non-engineers, and it explains complex topics in accessible language, and really nice diagrams and pictures in there about geology, how oil and gas forms underground, conventional versus unconventional plays, how they drill, all those kinds of things. And then another one is Oil and Gas Production in Non-Technical Language by Martin Raymond and William Leffler. And that one, again, gets more specifically into the production phase, and then helps you understand what happens after a well is drilled. And it has a brief section in there actually on minerals and royalties and strategies that oil and gas companies use, so you can understand the different types of partnerships. And we talked about this on the show in the past as well, but that's a great one. And then, like you might find that there is, through your local landman organization, that oftentimes they'll have seminars and workshops for folks. And sometimes you can join those as non-members as well. So you can look through the AAPL website. They'll have the local association. And so, for example, in Denver here, where Justin and I are, there's the DAPL, Denver Association of Professional Landmen, and they have educational presentations by attorneys or workshops and things like that. And you could attend those and learn that way as well. And then kind of one last thing kind of related to the attorney side is, if you are approached to lease, there are a couple of really good books on negotiating oil and gas leases, and there's an Oil and Gas Law in a Nutshell book. And so we'll link to those 2 books so that you can have those as a resource. And it kind of lists those different clauses you need to think about when leasing. And so you can ask your attorney and have that kind of educated discussion with them about negotiating that lease. So yeah, those are all great resources. And there's just a ton of, both formal education through community colleges and universities, and then online resources. And I will say that, plug for my mineral management course, I do have that kind of set up so that you can learn about the fundamental concepts around land ownership, the different types of interests, how that all fits together, how to read a legal description, the documents you should have, and how to do a title search, and then how to go to the State Oil and Gas Commission and find your wells and make sure you're getting paid correctly. And so you can find that at mineralrightspodcast.com, and then go to the courses section at the top of the page. But we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Absolutely, Matt. Yeah. And that's a great fundamental, especially if you're, just starting out and trying to learn. And many times when somebody's been managing minerals, whether it's family minerals, maybe you're representing a trust, people will move on to the CMM or RMM program. And that's kind of the next level of learning about some of the situations, perhaps, and fundamentals that would dictate the situations that you haven't encountered yet. And it's a great resource for that. It's a testing program. And so you kind of walk away with some confidence. And then if you're representing others, hopefully you can give them confidence as well in your ability to manage those.
So yeah, Justin, and then I think the last section that I look at as a great resource, if you like to learn via audio. So like those listeners, if you're listening to this, I assume that's the boat that you're in. If you're like me, listen to a lot of podcasts and want to learn about a topic, you'll find a podcast on that topic, and then binge listen to those, while you're mowing the lawn or walking the dog and things like that. So obviously this podcast is out there where we cover all the aspects about how you need to, what you need to know about managing your minerals and royalties. And then another great one from an industry perspective. So our podcast is tailored towards the individual mineral and royalty owner and investor and those kind of folks that want to learn the how-to. And if you want to learn more about the large institutional mineral buyers and the industry trends from a market perspective, Tim Powell, who's been on this show a couple of times, produces the Minerals and Royalties podcast. That's a great resource into the market side of things, and hearing interviews from industry leaders and CEOs, and they talk about particular basins that they're investing in, and the ins and outs of all of those kinds of things. That's a great one. Justin, what are some of the other podcasts that you've come across or that are out there that you think would be helpful?
For folks that are looking at investing, there's lots of great investing podcasts out there. There's certainly Mo Azari is one of my favorites, and he not only approaches the current market, but some of the fundamentals which apply, especially if you have a portfolio of mineral rights and royalties. Oftentimes, mineral owners need to kind of offset that or are looking to expand the portfolio due to the volatility of oil and gas. And so those are great places. Yeah, I'm not sure what else, Matt. The Mineral Rights and Royalties podcast is about the other one I listen to.
Yeah, I think those are good. There's some other oil and gas industry ones. OGGN is a network that has, they're more technical, more tailored towards the industry side. Digital Wildcatters also produce several oil and gas podcasts. Again, those are more tailored towards the energy professionals, but there's some interesting information out there if you want to just keep tabs on the industry and what's going on there. And I think, the other thing that we haven't mentioned, but, YouTube is a great resource out there. You can check out my YouTube channel. We have a lot of how-to videos for navigating your state oil and gas commission websites and things like that. Those are, I'd say, the top, from a podcast perspective and some of the video resources out there. That's always a good one if that's how you like to learn about things as well. I think overall, just to wrap up here, we have education is really an important first step and kind of an ongoing step as you manage your minerals and royalties. So whether, again, you're just getting started and trying to figure this all out for the first time, or if you're an experienced royalty owner at this part and you've negotiated several leases, and I find that I'm learning something new every day. And I think that having that curious mindset and being willing to learn will help ensure that you're successful in your journey. And there's a lot of resources out there with the internet and things moving online. It's really an amazing time to be a mineral and royalty owner. There's so much information out there, and if you need help in navigating that, that's where we're here. But I think that's just sort of the mindset to go into this is, knowing where to go for information, and then knowing that, you also probably need to get help from a professional, but at least having that education will help you maximize the benefit from that interaction. Getting a petroleum engineer or an attorney or a landman, they're expensive. They'll charge you money to help you, but you can maximize the benefit from that by being educated and knowing the type of questions to ask to get the most out of those interactions, I think. So I think that's the moral of the story here. Justin, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I think people should understand that it's really fundamental. If you're a mineral rights owner, it's not just something where you can sit back and collect the checks. It really behooves you to learn about the industry and to proactively manage your minerals. And that can be a long process, but like you said, Matt, there's a lot of resources out there. You can learn about this in whatever way is helpful for you, and enjoy the journey. Find the part that you really enjoy to learn about and focus on that one, and help to find others to help you with the rest.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for listening, and hopefully this has been helpful. And again, you can find all of these resources we've mentioned in the show notes at mineralrightspodcast.com. Thanks again.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.